We welcome you back to another edition of the Michael G. Nastos Show here at WDEE-TV.com. We're sharing Michigan with the world online, and happy to have as a guest today Bryan Kelly. Now, we have had all of the other mayoral candidates before the primary election took place in Ann Arbor. They were all Democrats, but there is no Republican running in the election in November. So Bryan Kelly is here with us running as an independent against the primary winner, Christopher Taylor. And that person will be the next mayor of Ann Arbor. So it's not all said and done by any stretch of the imagination. Bryan was able to receive enough petition signatures to be able to be on the ballot, and he will be on the ballot in November. And Bryan Kelly is with us, and thank you once again for joining me on my program today. And we'll talk about politics and Ann Arbor in general. Please talk about your early days in Ann Arbor. I know that you were a student between 2004 and 2008.
Yep.
You graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in English. So talk about 10 years ago when you arrived. I believe you came from Sterling Heights, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And how Ann Arbor has changed since you got here.
I think the primary difference is the high rises. I mean, the addition of a lot of concentrated residential growth in downtown. I mean, everything else is still there, and the charm and the reason that I love it is still there. And that's because a city is people. It's ultimately it's not buildings. It's the individuals that are drawn to that city. So the face of it has changed somewhat, but the soul is still there, and that's been a great comfort to find. For instance, last night I was at an open mic called the Augers Bazaar on Maple Road. Those kind of things where people can get together and enjoy music together, and is not facilitated by government or anything that the city necessarily does from a tax expenditure perspective is why I love this city. So,
how much more complicated is it to live in Ann Arbor these days? It can be simpler and less stressed in your mind as mayor. How could you facilitate that?
I don't think it's complicated. I think you still have to find a good deal if you're not making as much money as maybe you necessarily do to own a house and afford things. But I wouldn't call it any more complicated. If anything, it's simpler. I think transit options, Uber and Lyft having kind of a footprint in town now has definitely helped out with that. And if anything, there are more places to go, not less. I mean, we survived the economic recession, and actually, I give a lot of credit to Mayor Heathchip for guiding us through that, and for doing so without catastrophic cuts. I mean, we're down in terms of full-time employees. Big time from where we were at, but there's also a lot of indications in the research that I've done that we were overstaffed. So I don't think it's any more difficult or complicated for a person to find a living here that they wouldn't also find in terms of complications elsewhere. I mean, we still live in a country that is making a very, very slow recovery from the recession. So it comes down to finding the right deal, and it comes down to who you know, as always.
Always. What should the relationship be with the city in regards to the University of Michigan? It seems that they consume almost everything in terms of space, image, and prestige. And I know that there's a tax issue with the University of Michigan not paying, but it gives a lot to the city. But as a University of Michigan graduate, what do you see as the symbiosis between government and the U of M?
Well, the university says jump, and the city says how high, and that's it's crazy to say otherwise. They bring a lot. They're the economic driver. They're in many ways the cultural driver, and it's people. We're not just talking about an institution. We're talking about a number of employees. I was looking at the city numbers for Pittsburgh recently, and the only reason Pittsburgh's been able to survive, losing a lot of the manufacturing sector, is because the health industry has been able to weather the storm, and it's the same way with the University of Michigan. The health sector is huge. You asked about I would contest your point that the university occupies prestige. The city's winning a lot of awards, and I mean it's in some ways it's a kind of a marketing thing, but I think we genuinely are just the land is beautiful, the elevation change, the seasons, all that. It's no accident that we win these awards. I don't think it's just getting lucky in the awards ceremony. I think we genuinely deserve these things, and I think as time goes on, it's only going to get better in that regard. And that's because the university feeds us, but it's also because inherently we are a great, beautiful city.
There's no doubt about that. We're with Bryan Kelly, who's running as an independent for mayor of the city of Ann Arbor in the November election. against the Democratic primary winner, Christopher Taylor, and we'll be back with another segment with Bryan Kelly today on the Michael G. Nastos Show here at WDEE-TV.com online. Come back with us. We're back here on the Michael G. Nastos Show. That's me, and we're here with Bryan Kelly. That's him. He's running for mayor for the city of Ann Arbor, Michigan. He's an independent candidate, and he is 28 years young. He came up as a writer and got his degree in English at the University of Michigan. He's worked in various retail stores. And I want to talk a little bit about the business and economic climate, how your vision for the city dovetails with that. And I understand that from your online writings that you're calling yourself an anti-development candidate, and I wonder what that entails in relation to the economic and business climate that has grown a lot in Ann Arbor, but also puts up big buildings and a lot of concrete.
Sure. Well, I would say I was calling myself the anti-development candidate, and that's this being my first race, I've learned a lot about shooting my mouth off a bit, and I think to make a big splash, and also genuinely out of a concern over what direction the city was taking, I kind of wanted to come in talking about anti-development. But you can't be a reasonable politician, or I should say government official in the city of Ann Arbor, and be anti-development, because development is the only way that the city can overcome the mutual enemy for all municipalities, and that's the state. I mean, when you look at what the state has done in terms of limiting its shared revenue, limiting the city's ability to raise revenue, you got to be pro-development.
Especially
that's
in
the only
last
way.
4 years, would you say?
Yeah, it hasn't gotten better, but it all started in when they passed the Headley Amendment, and I think it was 1976, and that was you got rid of the
ago.
Yeah, and what you're seeing nowadays is the state's ability to make cuts and then slightly improve on those cuts and make the claim that they've raised spending. They're and they control the bullhorn, so they're able to sound like they're actually being munificent with their funds when they're not. So yeah, the anti-development thing was something that, given time, it's sort of like Dr. Strangelove, or how I learned to stop worrying and love development, because I think it is the way for the city's economy to improve. The point that I think I have come to settle on is that I am against prioritizing downtown as a development hub. I want to think 20 and 50 years in the future and think about, if in 50 years we're just a big burly downtown and a bunch of neighborhoods that aren't particularly well connected to that, that's a failure on our part. I want proximate local economic development in neighborhoods. I want it to be responsibly done. I don't want somebody to, because you get a little nimbiness, a little not in my backyard with economic development in neighborhoods. But I think it can be, conscionably done, and that's the effort that I would want to see. I've been talking about a local development authority to be some kind of counterbalance to the downtown development authority, because I don't think you necessarily want to get rid of the DDA. I think they do some good and very focused work with downtown. But I want a counterweight to that. I want to think about where in town we can sort of let some of the built-up entrepreneurial energy out. And I live on Miller Avenue. I think Miller would be a great example of a place where have some mixed use development down that corridor to connect it to the stadium and the Maple Hub and all that. That's the development that I'm in favor of. I think we think too much about downtown as our past, present, and future, and I think we miss out on the ability to to really develop neighborhoods and make the line I used in the MLive article was more Brooklyn and less Manhattan, more less of a concentrated high-rise situation and more of a kind of a bunch of proximate hubs, all with their own activity going on, with downtown being kind of the hub of that wheel.
We talked about water quality just briefly off camera, and I want to talk about environmental protection
Sure.
and sustainability, which is important to any city. Can you give us an outline where you think that can improve in Ann Arbor?
I think it begins with citizens. I mean, this is something that the city, I think that we take very good steps on that. I think the mayor has done a good job of, even something as small as converting all the lights in the city hall building to LED, which when I met with him, he was particularly excited about that initiative. No, I think environmental and sustainability initiatives begin with people's choices in their homes, and that's something a libertarian, a classical liberal like myself is always going to say. Now, the government has to do all that it can, particularly with the dioxane plume, to contain it, and to dither less and do more, and also to hold the people who are responsible accountable publicly. I mean, right. that is how you punish. You punish polluters somewhat in the courts, but in the court of public opinion. Because that is where people are able to, execute transactions and hold identities and people accountable for their behavior.
Briefly, you called yourself a Lorax candidate.
Yes.
Does that dovetail into this?
Well, I still love Dr. Seuss. No, I mean, I hold the ideal of being the candidate that speaks for the trees seriously. I mean,
in Ann Arbor, that would be important.
But again, this is something that the more you research, the more you realize we have a lot of parks and we have the green belt, and the difficulty is that I don't know we're doing a particularly good job of maintaining them, and that comes down to a revenue thing. I mean, the fact that Chris Taylor's on the Parks Advisory Commission is something I almost want to hit him on, because some of our parks are neglected. And I think that does ultimately come back to how do we raise revenue, and I'd like to talk more about that in future segments.
Very good. We're going to talk a little bit more with this gentleman, and he is running for the candidacy of mayor as an independent. It's Bryan Kelly from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and we'll be back with another segment of the Michael G. Nastos Show for this day here on WDEE-TV, sharing Michigan with the world at your fingertips. We're back with Bryan Kelly, who is running for the mayor of Ann Arbor, Michigan, against Christopher Taylor, who won the primary. There is no Republican opposition, so the independent, Bryan Kelly, is here with us today. We're talking about his potential candidacy for the mayor of the City of Trees. Talk a little bit about transportation, how that can be improved in your idea and your umbrella, especially bicycles and electric vehicles, working with the big three, traffic laws, the roads themselves. Sure. It's a large issue that I think needs to be addressed on several different strata. Agreed.
And I mean, it begins with roads. And I don't really understand why we're not discussing a road millage or an increase in the current road millage. Because I think it's the data is out there, and the data is the people, and I think the people would support it overwhelmingly. And that's the kind of thing that is a bit of a no-brainer. Now they're looking for the county to pick that up, and I guess the county can pass a millage without voter approval.
Huron Street is just awful.
Oh, it's shot. It's shot. Yeah, I'm with you.
They fixed Miller and they fixed Dexter, so maybe the next step is Huron.
You hope so.
Go parallel.
It's so funny because sometimes research benefits you in this regard, because you find out, for instance, that North Main in between let's say Sunset to M14 is actually a state road, so that's why it's just sitting there in just deplorable condition for when people come in on football Saturdays and think, what happened to Ann Arbor? That's the state's fault. And so that brings me back to the point that this is the state's fault. I mean, it begins with the fact that there was $115 million. This is where I say something nice about independent politics. There was $115 million set aside that was going to be distributed for road maintenance through apportionment. And because it's a Republican-controlled legislature, only the Republican, or mostly Republican districts got the funding, and Washtenaw was left off the list.
Yeah,
and
I
would say something mean about Republicans if I didn't think Democrats might probably do the same thing, because parties are about the extinction of the other party. So that's
these days anyway.
They just don't seem to want to swallow their ego and do the right thing for the people. So I think I take the independence very seriously, and I make jokes that I would never want to join a party that would have me as a member, but it's true. I mean,
sounds like the old Groucho Marx.
It is just lifted from Groucho Marx. But no, I think this is when you need to start thinking about having an independent, particularly in your executive, because in your executive is where you synthesize these sort of competing political needs. Now, there's not a whole lot of political divisiveness in Ann Arbor, at least publicly. I think there are conservatives out there. But
you've made comments that the 6-5 votes are not necessarily a quorum.
Right, and I think for instance, the 413, 6-5 vote was a good example.
That'd be 413 East Huron, which got you involved in the political arena. You went to a city council meeting and found out more about this, and then got involved. That's your beginning, really.
Correct. Yep. And that, although many things did get me in, it was the fact that, for instance, I talked to Dave Askins of the Ann Arbor Chronicle and about the anti-development thing.
Which we miss, by the way.
Yeah, deeply. Yeah, especially for someone like me who's trying to do research. But to bring this back to the transportation point again, it does begin with an individual's choices in terms of the transportation that they allow. But this is also why I'm interested in proximate development, because downtowns are things, in essence, of the past in terms of how they, focus a lot of people who need to move from other places in order to get downtown. So I'm not against the light rail and these kind of solutions. It's not where I primarily would probably be spending money, but there's clearly a mandate out there for it. And I like the fact that every time we make a road improvement, we try to at least prioritize bike travel too. Because I'm a cyclist. I worked at Great Lakes Cycling for a bit, and have continued the cycling life after that. And think that that's the future, is to be a leader and to show in your behavior to other cities that an automobile is not necessary in life all the time.
What do you think about the long or medium distance rail system that they're proposing?
Well, again, if you can synthesize and bring together funding so that everybody pays their way, I'm in support of it. I'm against the county. I might be against the county road millage. I'll have to look into it more. So I don't want to go too much on the record, but I guess I don't like. I live in a city first, a county second, a state third, and a country fourth, and I think the city needs to step up and do everything it can and not wait for things like the county and the state to catch up. So again, that brings us back to a revenue thing. One thing I think we ought to pursue is what's called a Headley override. So we talked about the Headley Amendment. There's such a thing called a Headley override, which is basically like the voters would vote whether to override capping the millage rate relative to inflation. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm trying to be, so that by the end of this I can speak with some smoothness.
I'm not sure anybody is, but you have some great ideas that you've been giving to us.
Thanks. And essentially what I would want to do is, rather even than a new road millage or an improvement, just pass a Headley override on the road millage, and it might go up by a percentage and a half, and that may be the funding that we need. The other interesting point, I met with the city administrator, Steve Powers, yesterday, and he said that one of the reasons we haven't been making road improvements is we were setting aside a lot of money for stadium bridge improvement, that stadium bridge that was crumbling, and the federal government stepped in on that. So I'm going to check the veracity of that remark, but if it's any amelioration to the public, that's one of the reasons why maybe we haven't been making all the funding decisions.
Bridges are a big issue, especially this morning with the pedestrian bridge in Southfield collapsing because a truck ran into it.
Oh my gosh.
We'll talk more with Bryan Kelly, prospective mayor of Ann Arbor, in just a bit. Our final segment coming up on the Michael G. Nastos Show here on WDEE-TV.com. Ypsilanti, Michigan based, and proud of it. We conclude the Michael G. Nastos Show for today here on WDEE-TV in another segment with Bryan Kelly, who is a prospective mayoral advocate and definitely a person who looks for change as an independent running against Christopher Taylor in the Democratic versus Independent election for mayor in Ann Arbor that comes up in November. And I'd like to talk, we had just a brief discussion about culture and arts in Ann Arbor. Obviously, Ann Arbor prides itself as a hub. What can be done to bring artists here and keep them active and making a living wage? It's not easy anywhere, but Ann Arbor could be a place where we could bring more people in and sustain them.
Yeah, well, I think we're doing a lot now. I mean, I think we have to make sure that what the institutions that are in place now remain properly funded. The Michigan
What would those
Theater,
be?
the Michigan Theater, for example, things like that. Whatever the city and whatever citizens can do. I think the institutions that exist now, it's also incumbent on them to make sure they're well funded and to use both old and new sources of revenue. I mean, I think Kickstarters and things like that are going to be able to be great ways to reach the public when in need. Again, this is going to come down to an individual's decision to come here and to facilitate a life. I mean, as a writer, you put up with a lot of indignity in terms of how you make ends meet. But that's part of the reason why you live in a place like this, because of the great people that decide to come here. I'm not sure city government can do a whole lot. I think sometimes the city's efforts to facilitate culture can come across as a little tone deaf, or maybe a little maybe my generation just doesn't necessarily always care for them. I mean, they're not reasons to get rid of them, because we serve many generations in this town of people that consume and enjoy the arts. So I guess I'm the kind of person that I talked about that Augur's Kettle, that open mic. Those are the kind of things that I think facilitate a great Ann Arbor, and there's nothing the city government can do to help. It comes down to a person's need to get over their fear of performing in front of a crowd. That's all.
The other thing is that Ann Arbor has propagated funds and provided support for public art.
Yeah.
They have been behind certain music events. Cultural events are everywhere via the University of Michigan, Washtenaw Community College, or any other outlet. So is there a way that the Downtown Development Association or some other organization can get more involved with the Ann Arbor Art Association, with University Musical Society, with independent people? The Michigan Theater is a great example,
Sure.
Of course.
I hesitate to involve the Downtown Development Authority in anything, because I know if the Downtown Development Authority gets involved, it means your parking rates are probably going to go up, because they're on a very fixed budget. And they're already talking about doing that. And I got a good number of signatures from business owners around town that knew me and liked me, and I wandered in and said, hey, I'm doing this crazy thing and running for mayor. And they all said, the number one thing that you can do to improve the business climate in Ann Arbor is lower the parking rates. So, and they invoke the example of Birmingham, where you get your first, I think is it 1 or 2 hours free? I mean, that's, if anything, we need to involve the DDA in less and cut the parking rates and give people the first hour free. This question was about the arts, but whenever I hear the DDA, for instance,
it dovetails on other things.
Yeah,
for
right.
Sure.
And I look at the DDA's expenditure sheet, and I think they don't have a penny to squeeze out of that at this point. They're going to have to raise revenues if they do. So, but what was your original question? I'm sorry.
Well, you answered the question, because I think that as culture and arts grow in Ann Arbor grows.
Right.
So it's not just business and economic development; it's spiritual development.
Spiritual development is big. I haven't made a big priority of talking about it, but I felt called to run for mayor, and I think that there are parts of politics when people start talking like that where they kind of rear back, and I'm not talking about some messianic quest for Ann Arbor to take over the Middle East in any fashion, but it resonates with me that there is that spiritual side to Ann Arbor, and I think that is something that we need to be proud of. We don't necessarily need to hide that away. So I don't intend to do that.
Right. Speaking of pride, name your 3 proudest accomplishments as a young person, and how much more can you do as the mayor of Ann Arbor should you be elected?
Well, this is big, what I'm doing now. I mean, this is a big leap for me, because this, I have certain strengths, and they're not always in policy research. So I would say getting on this ballot and not eventually saying, hey, I made a mistake, Chris Taylor's your guy, but sticking with it, I think, has been one of my proudest accomplishments, and I intend to go all the way with it and see where life takes me after it. I would say another accomplishment that I am proud of is writing and finishing a novel and just taking the leap with writing, because when you're a writer, you're sort of besieged on all sides by people who want to tell you, I don't know, it's a pretty tough life.
You're primarily a fiction writer.
Yes,
correct?
although these days I think I'm a journalist in the way that I'm approaching this mayoral campaign. I mean, my website, www.bkformayorofA2.com, is a blog. It's a campaign diary. As I research things, I say, here's what I've found. And for instance, the anti-development thing, started out talking a lot about that. But, given time, you have to evolve your position if you're going to be a reasonable candidate. People are going to listen to you. My third proudest accomplishment is, I don't know that I've got a third yet, maybe eating vegetables on a regular basis.
That's
it's pretty
great.
tough. So,
how has your life changed since you declared for mayor and got the signatures?
Topsy-turvy. Yeah. I mean, it's been marvelous. Maybe the only drawback has been everywhere I go, people wind up talking about politics, and that rarely ends in a friendly conversation. But it's basically like when I would say the difference between George Washington the farmer and George Washington the president. Suddenly you have to make a multitude of decisions on a regular basis. You're a public figure, so you've got to worry about that and about saying the wrong things. But I think the lessons are coming at an appropriate rate, and I think I'm internalizing them at an appropriate rate. So,
we've been with Bryan Kelly, who's running for mayor as an independent in the November election against Christopher Taylor, the primary winner on the Democrat side. And my name is Michael G. Nastos. Once again, sir, thank you for being here. Really appreciate you coming into our studios and sharing some insight with us. And we'll be back at some point in time in the near future with another interview. We feature politics, music, people with interesting perspectives, giving our life meaning here in the southeastern Michigan area. And Bryan Kelly hopefully will give us that and more. Once again, thanks for tuning in. This is WDEE-TV, sharing Michigan with the world at your fingertips on the internet. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.